the Westwood School Committee Thursday, March 10th meeting to order. I'm hearing an echo, so can people make sure they're muted? Great, thanks. So roll call attendance. Carol.
Here.
Tony.
Here.
Amanda.
Here.
Charlie.
Here.
And I am here as well, clearly. Okay, I'd like to recognize the live stream available online at www.westwood.k12.ma.us/live to provide real-time public access to the activities of the school committee in accordance with an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency. This meeting is also being recorded for later broadcast by Westwood Media Center. I do want to mention that I believe since our last meeting was February 10th. So since our last meeting, Governor Baker did extend the emergency COVID-19 measures. So we could be virtual if we wanted until July 15th. He extended it from March 31st through July 15th. I just wanted to mention that. So we will get into now the superintendent's report.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I want to start tonight by acknowledging that we had a very concerning incident at the middle school this week involving a student or students renaming their phones with aliases and then airdropping unsolicited messages to other students. So as I understand it, airdrop is a feature on iPhones that is used to share photographs. I am aware that other districts have dealt with inappropriate and offensive unsolicited images being shared. In Thurston's case, the issue was the offensive aliases that popped up on other students' phone screens, including one that used a racist slur. Technology always poses a challenge for us. There's always going to be a next thing that students discover. And in the case of cell phones, it is particularly challenging given that students are using their personal devices that are connected to their own data plan. And so their activity is not traceable by us or containable because it's not on our network. And, clearly we need to continue to educate students about the ethical use of technology. But technology aside, more to the point, racist or hateful language has no place in our schools. And this is simply not a debatable point. This incident underscores the importance of our continuing as a district to focus on the diversity, equity, and inclusion work and our efforts to be an anti-racist district. The work to help students become kind, empathetic people who value learning about and understanding other people's experiences and perspectives is important, ongoing, long-term work. So I do want to thank the teacher who responded skillfully in the moment. I also want to express my admiration and appreciation for students who continue to provide leadership to the Thurston community, and many of whom just very clearly care a lot about making Thurston a place where all of their classmates feel welcomed, feel a sense of belonging. I also just wanted to mention, as you know, the Town Select Board and Human Rights Task Force recently issued a statement in support of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in Westwood. I know that Amanda is our school committee rep to the Human Rights Task Force and signed that statement on behalf of the school committee. Allison also signed it as our representative from the district. I do want you to know that the leadership team for the Westwood Public Schools, including the central office administrators and the principals, also sent a letter to the select board acknowledging and thanking them for including schools in the framing of their statement. We think that the ongoing work and priorities of the district are in alignment with the commitments that were articulated by the select board for the community. And we appreciate the recognition that we all need to do this work together as a community. In that spirit, I also want to say that we appreciate how parents have partnered with us this week to have conversations about the incidents at the middle school at home. And I want to say that I know and I believe that most students at Thurston are kind and thoughtful and treat others well. And that it's still important to have these conversations with all kids so that they're equipped to address, instances where the community values and norms are violated. So I thank you, parents, who have really been very supportive this week. So that work continues, and in Mr. Redmond's letter to the district, he outlined some steps that we will be taking. A word now, related topic, we are thinking about our equity audit, which, as you know, we have had an RFP out. I just want to update you where we are in that process. We have been through the RFP evaluation process, and we are poised to award the contract. I want to thank the group of people who reviewed the written packages and the oral presentations and have been part of this process. So that was Latifa Frank, our Director of Equity, Integration, Community Partnerships, Allison Borchers, Assistant Superintendent, Abby Hanscom, Director of Student Services, Lemma Jean-Baptiste, Director of Business and Finance. We had 2 teachers join us, Christine Blair from Sheehan and Chelsea Santos-Freiberg from Downey. And we also had a parent representative, Monique Damon Johnson, who I want to thank as well, because I know this was really time consuming. And while I'm thanking people, Michelle Miller, who is the town's procurement officer, has really steered and guided us through this whole process. And she will be helping us to negotiate the contract and award the contract to an organization. I expect that it's going to be finalized very soon, and the audit should begin this month. So we're very excited to get started on that process. An update from the MSBA, Massachusetts School Building Authority. So as you know, we were notified by the MSBA last month that they declined to move forward our statement of interest for Sheehan. We anticipated that that would be the case, given that we haven't even broken ground on Hanlon Deerfield yet. What I want to mention is that the timeline for this most past round of submissions to the MSBA was a little bit different due to COVID. It was pushed a little later. And as a result, the deadline for the next round of submissions is upon us already in April. And so we can resubmit that SOI for Sheehan to be considered in the next round. We would then hear back in December to see if we got invited into the program. And Lemma and I both think that this is a reasonable thing to do. I mean, we have it all ready to go. Our experience of getting accepted into the program on our first submission for Hanlon, as you know, was very unusual. We were very fortunate. And many districts applied to the program for multiple years for a project before getting in. And so I think that we should adopt a similar strategy. We don't see any downside to trying again in this round. And so one of the items on the agenda tonight is that we're suggesting that you authorize us to submit another SOI for Sheehan. And if that were to be approved tonight, then I would also need to go to the select board to get their authorization as well. And we could submit it in April. So that's that situation. I know we'll discuss that later. Moving on to some things about parent programming. So first, I want to thank Latifa Frank for her efforts to provide us with a great program in February that was about celebrating the legacy of METCO. And so we were treated to a performance by Malcolm Wright, class of 22, a musical performance. And then we were joined by Millie Abahe Thomas, who is the executive director of METCO, and Colin Stokes, also of METCO, as well as 3 of our students, Karen Garraway, Deja Higginbottom, and Staria Harris. And they presented to us about the history of METCO and its origins in the civil rights movement of the 1960s, and kind of reflected on some of the things that they had learned. And I have to say, I found it to be a really interesting and inspiring program. I know that all of the members of the school committee were there. Thank you for being there. And, I'm guessing that, like me, you learned some new things about the importance and purpose of this program. And I also want to thank all the members of the Westwood community who made time to attend. I thought that was wonderful. We have two parent programs coming up, one in April and in May. The first program is related to school start times and the research around adolescent sleep. And so I'm just foreshadowing that. We'll get information about that out soon. We're still nailing down some of the specifics. The second program is a presentation by Elizabeth Englander from the Massachusetts Aggression Reduction Center, which is an organization out of Bridgewater State. Dr. Englander has presented in Westwood in the past, I think most recently in the fall of 2019. And I have to say, we've always gotten very good feedback about her presentations. For this program, she's going to be focusing on kids' social relationships and use of social media, and really talking about how parents can help their kids navigate that context. She always touches on issues of conflict and bullying. That's the work that her organization does. And for this presentation, she will also reflect on some of the new or heightened challenges in this realm that are related to the pandemic. So the program is scheduled for May 4th at 7 p.m. It will be a virtual presentation, and we will be recording it so that we can post it for people who can't make it that night. Moving on to the FY23 budget process update. So since our last school committee meeting, Lem and I presented the school committee or the school department's proposed budget to the Finance and Warrant Commission. Subsequent to that presentation, we had a very substantive discussion with the members of the FinCom's Education Subcommittee. That subcommittee will make its report to FinCom about our budget at its meeting this Tuesday night. And then the FinCom's final public hearing on the budget is on March 29th. I neglected to put COVID updates on my superintendent's report on the agenda. I don't know how I could have forgotten that. So a few thoughts about COVID. As you know, the district transitioned to mask optional on February 28th. We have monitored our COVID cases, our numbers in the last 2 weeks since then. We are not seeing a significant difference in the number of cases from before the vacation and now. I will say we do seem to have a little cluster happening at Sheehan in the last couple of days, and we are watching that very carefully. Our COVID team tells us that the community's appetite for routine COVID testing does seem to be waning a bit. The participation rates in our weekly pool testing has declined significantly, particularly among older students. This may be a reflection of the fact that families are choosing to participate in the at-home rapid program and feel that that is working for them. At this point, though, we do plan to continue to offer both the routine pool PCR tests and the at-home rapid testing programs at least until the end of April. We've said that we will definitely keep doing that until at least a week after the April break. And we're just going to reassess in April and see what the situation is. If it makes sense to continue, we will. So the transition to the mask optional environment does appear to be going well. We've checked in 3 times in the last 2 weeks as a district leadership team, as recently as today. And the principals all report that they have not received any reports or any observations of people violating our expectation that individuals' choice over whether to mask or not mask be treated respectfully. And we are really watching that situation. We've talked about that a lot here at school committee. I was really reflecting that, it has been the case throughout the pandemic that the school committee, you all have really had to make decisions that consider the safety and the needs of all of our students. And I think that you have consistently communicated a concern for members of our community who may be particularly vulnerable to COVID. And, we recognize our responsibility as a district to provide equitable access and support to all students. And I think that has been a guiding principle in all of our decision making. Last spring, for example, when we were making plans to return to full in-person instruction in April, I reflected at that time to the community that many of our BIPOC families had opted for the fully remote model. And, I noted that we were mindful of the ways that the pandemic has disproportionately impacted certain communities and the need to support all of our students. As we contemplated removing masks potentially last August, and ultimately you did not, at that time, you specifically talked about your concern for our medically fragile students and the fact that many members of our community at that time had not had the opportunity to be vaccinated. And so, with this transition to mask optional, I think we have to remain mindful that our preschoolers are still not eligible to be vaccinated. And that the risk posed by COVID to some of our community members who have significant medical needs still remains high. And that some of our students and staff go home each night to communities like Boston and Cambridge and Framingham, where COVID has had a very different impact, and that all of those things influence people's choices around masking. And so our message to students and staff around masking continues to be that different families will make different choices and decisions about masking, and that all choices will be supported. So, and so far that does seem to be going well. I recognize that, as we go on in time, the proportion of people who continue to mask may change, and we will need to continue to watch this. So I do just quickly want to share with you some examples of how that message is framed at each level, because I have gotten some questions from parents about how we communicate this. And so I'm going to share my screen if you give me 1 second. So I want to share with you an example of what we call a social story. This is a particular strategy that is used at the elementary level when talking about something important to the community. And I have to say, this particular social story is one that I know that we had teachers in Westwood use, and they borrowed it from a teacher in another district. And I wish I knew who that person was so that I could give appropriate credit, because somebody did great work here. But this just gives you a sense of how we go about it. So this would be maybe in a morning meeting context, for example. And I'm just going to quickly flip through the slides, right? A change is coming. This year we've been wearing face masks. But now families have a choice about mask wearing. Every family is going to make a choice that's best for the people in their family. Whatever your family chooses, it's okay. Sometimes change can feel confusing or hard. Talk to your teacher if you're having hard feelings. If you have any questions, you can ask your teacher or another adult at school. And then, ways that we can show respect to our friends. Be kind to everyone, include all friends, play and work together, not question a friend's family choice, right? And then specific strategies about what to say if this doesn't, if the issue comes up. If someone says something to you about your family's choice, you can simply say, my family made the choice to wear masks, or my family made the choice to not wear masks. And then ways that we can all be safe. And then we go back and we say, so here are the big ideas again, right? I went through that very quickly. Obviously, an elementary teacher would be taking their time. The students would have discussion. The group would have a chance to talk about things that they're thinking or feeling during that. But that's how we would approach that conversation with younger students. At the middle school, the topic was brought up through advisory, which is the structure that we have at the middle school to talk about important community things. And so this is a slide that was used in those advisory blocks, right? So here's what you need to know, and you can see that we lay out the expectations here. And it was really framed in terms of respecting other choices, being kind to each other, that everything is, every choice is fine. And if somebody isn't being respectful or kind, then you have an obligation to, tell the person to stop. And so it's the same message. It's just delivered in a developmentally different way, right, for that moment, but still in an advisory block where kids would have a chance to, to discuss it. And then at the high school, the high school principal sent out an email message to students the night before they were returning, And you can see at the high school, again, the message is, more straightforward, right? A reminder that this is what we expect and this is how we're going to go. So, the conversation and teachers reinforce this message as well, right? All the adults are reinforcing this message. And the message kind of gets rolled out in different ways at different levels. Lastly, I do just want to share that I want to give you a glimpse into a professional development session that happened yesterday in the district with staff. And so the topic broadly had to do with culturally responsive teaching and specifically supporting AAPI students. But I think that it's an example of how things like creating a supportive culture around masks is really related to bigger picture ongoing work. And so this was a long workshop, and some obviously will not replicate it here. But you can see this was just a slide with the agenda. And so they were going to be talking about who we mean by our AAPI students. And we heard some student voices. And then it was framed around really 3 myths that are related to the AAPI community, talking about sort of where do these things come from, and then how might these ideas impact our students, and then really moving it to the next step of like, now what? So that teachers can think about the implications for their practice. And so one of the, oops, I just skipped a couple there. So one of the 3 sort of framing myths that they were talking about was, what is the impact of connecting AAPI people to COVID-19? And looking at some of the statistics, we obviously know that, like nationally and here in Massachusetts, that there was a real increase in hate incidents reported against AAPI individuals, and thinking about that as it pertains to the pandemic, and then saying, and then how do our students experience that, right? And thinking about how our AAPI students may experience the impact of this, and also thinking about how our non-AAPI students may experience the impact of that, and having some time to discuss that. And then again, moving on to action steps. So what of that? What does that mean for us in our practice? And using sort of this framework and questions to work together as professionals to make sense of that and to think about how to move into action to support all of our students. So I just wanted to share that with you because, there's lots of work that is sort of continuing, ongoing, everyday work that's happening in the district. And everybody doesn't know about everything that's happening every day here. But that's just one snapshot of something yesterday that speaks to like this bigger context of the work that we're doing. In terms of masking, at this point, I would say that the proportion of students and staff who are masking varies by schools. Overall, though, we estimate that about 25% of our students continue to mask. We think the percentage of staff who are still masking is probably a little higher than that. This has changed since even the Monday after vacation. So the Monday back from vacation, we thought that about half of students were masking, and this week it's about a quarter. And again, that might change, and we will continue to support everyone's choices. And I don't want to put Ruby on the spot, but I'm going to put Ruby on the spot. So just from the student perspective, do you think that my take on things at the high school is accurate, that it's going pretty well?
I think that's really accurate, actually. Like, I think that also like students, at least at the high school, are kind of doing the whole like, what are my friends doing kind of thing too. But I think you're right, Ms. Parks.
Okay. All right, good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Yes, so we will continue to watch that situation. And then just lastly, very quickly, I just want to update you on our Director of Safety and Security hiring process. So interviews start next week. We've screened and we have invited 9 candidates in for first round interviews with central office. And from there, we will narrow the field of candidates, and we will also broaden who's involved in the interview process for the next round, but we're trying to move that along efficiently. So I think that is it for me for tonight.
Okay, Thank you, Emily. Are there any questions on the superintendent's update?
Yeah, I guess a question on the Director of Security and Safety. So just because I'm a little surprised that we haven't hired this position yet.
Mhm.
February 4th, 2021, we talked about this and we approved it for the following meeting for January 1.
Yep.
And it's now March 10th. So I guess I'm a little surprised. It's a very important issue, at least I think to this committee and to the community. And
Yeah.
I'm a little surprised this committee hasn't been updated. And we're now on March 10th and we don't even have any candidates. So anyway, it'd be
Yeah.
helpful to understand the process here.
Well, I don't think it's anything about the process that has slowed us down. I think it's something about the year, to be honest, that has slowed us down. And so we've just encountered some challenges this fall that we didn't anticipate in terms of how we're spending our time. And so we posted it at the beginning of February, and we posted it for 3 weeks. We've just done the paper screen and evaluated it using our little rubric. And now we're moving into interviews. So I think at this point, it'll move along pretty quickly.
I think I'd be interested in the rest of the committee. Is this a priority for the rest of the committee or just be interested in the rest of the school committee?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely want to hire this person sooner rather than later. I sympathize with the challenges we've had in the fall, but I think now the process is moving, and I think that it looks like with 9 first rounds, we clearly have a pool of qualified candidates. So hopefully we can move that along pretty quickly.
Yep, I hope so.
Thank you, Emily. Another detailed, excellent report. I have 3 quick questions for you. The equity audit, I'm not that familiar with it, and I'd just like to know the people who are doing it, who we choose. I assume they've done this before for other schools or possibly colleges or in that. And what have they suggested do they find in an equity audit? Do they try to find problems that need to be addressed? Is that a part of it? And do they also come up with suggestions for changes? Is that a part of the equity audit? I hope that is. And based on previous experience, I would expect they would have that. My second question has to do with the MSBA and Sheehan. Do we know exactly what needs to be done at Sheehan? You know, all the different problems with Sheehan, do we have that? You know, I know in the past, we've done all kinds of analyses of what the needs are and how much they cost. So we submit something, MSBA, are we submitting a request for specific money or to address certain problems? And what goes into that? And the third quick question is, when the people are doing home tests and they find a positive home test, do they notify us to put into our database, or how is that handled?
Yes, so I'm going to take your questions in reverse order. So yes, for the at-home testing, we do have a form, a link, and people report a positive result to our COVID team. We've asked them to do that, and people do seem to be doing that. So that's that process. In terms of the SOI for Sheehan, so this is similar to what we did for the Hanlon. Basically, you submit a statement of interest saying, these are all of the needs for this building. And as you point out, we have done exhaustive studies on that. So yes, we have a very good sense of where Sheehan is. And then if we were to be invited into eligibility, just like happened in the Hanlon process, then we would start to work with the MSBA to say, what are some of the options to address that? And so that could be a new school, that could be renovating the current school. And, you know, as you know, that is like a lengthy and comprehensive process to figure that out. So the statement of interest to MSBA, though, is just to even get started with them, to have them say that they are willing to have a conversation with us about the possibility of collaborating with us on a project and providing partial reimbursement. In terms of the equity audit, yes, absolutely. The organizations that we got proposals from and met with are experienced in this realm. We were clear that, you know, that is important to us, that we're looking for that. And I would say that, you know, the audit process involves their reviewing quantitative data, qualitative data, really taking a comprehensive look at our efforts to be an equitable school district. And I would say that, you know, any kind of finding a report would identify assets, so things that maybe they think are strengths or things that we're doing well, and then they would also have recommendations, and that's the purpose of the process, is to get recommendations about how we can move forward with our goals, and they can be helpful to help us prioritize and think about like what has to happen first, what has to happen next, and help us shape that work.
And do they interview students and former students as a part of that process?
Yes. So there's all kinds of qualitative data. So they would be surveying students, families, staff. They would also be conducting focus groups. So yes, there's absolutely an opportunity, and that's a very important part of the process.
I think it'd be great if we could interview former Medco students, 5 years after they graduate, 10 years, and get feedback from them on what it was like to go to school here.
I think getting feedback from alums is always a great idea. Yeah.
Well, just to close my thought, one humble school committee member, and some of the challenges we've had at 850 High Street this year, there is no more important priority for me personally than getting this director of safety and security hired. So that's my humble opinion, given the issues we've had. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Thanks, Charlie. Anyone else have anything on the updates? Oh, okay. We are now moving into public comment. I just want to remind everyone of sort of the guidelines. You must be on Zoom to participate in public comment. So if you're watching this live streaming, you got to hop on Zoom. To comment, you need to use the raise your hand feature on Zoom. You'll be called on and then unmuted. When you are unmuted, please provide your name and address. Keep your remarks to 3 minutes or less. As you can see, we do have the clock just to give you a guideline of where you are. Direct all comments to the chair. And I'd just like to remind people that public participation, as mandated by the Massachusetts open meeting laws, does provide the opportunity for any member of the community to speak directly to the school committee. This isn't a community forum. This is not a back and forth discussion, nor is it a time for the school committee to discuss their views. So the school committee will not typically respond to public participation comments except to clarify comments. Just a reminder that this one-way nature of public participation is exactly why we created the school committee office hours, so that residents would actually have an opportunity for a dialogue with the school committee and the administration. But for now, we are in public comment. So having said that, I am going to turn it, and Connor, or is it Connor today with West, or Dan? Looks like Dan with Westwood Media Center. I see we have first in line, Meredith Schaefer from SMART. So if you would unmute Meredith, and Meredith, if you would provide your name and address before commenting.
Thank you, Maya. My name is Meredith Schaefer, and I'm not a resident of Westwood. I live in Alexandria, Virginia, at 814 Jefferson Street. But I work for SMART, which is the Sheet Metal, Air Rail, and Transportation Workers International. And we do have members that live in Westwood throughout Massachusetts, throughout the US. And so I'm representing them in my comments today. I forget, are those all the things you need before I?
Yep.
Okay. I want to follow the rules. So we've communicated with the school building committee on the new Hanlon Elementary School, and we just wanted to share both our relief at the decision that was made, I believe March 4th, to remove Kingspan Cooltherm K15 from the proprietary materials list for that project, but also an ongoing concern that the architect stated during that meeting that the new plan for the insulation on the building would involve XPS insulation, and that Kingspan also makes XPS products. And so we just wanted to sort of clarify our communications and concerns about the use of Kingspan products. These are based on research of, hundreds of pages of documents that have recently been made public in the last year and a half in the United Kingdom, where there is a government inquiry that Kingspan is party to because their K-15 was in the Grenfell Tower, which burned in 2017, killing 72 people, the worst residential fire since World War II. And there's an enormous movement around justice for Grenfell survivors and the bereaved. We're coming up on the 5th year anniversary of that in the UK. So there's tremendous scrutiny of Kingspan's testimony and evidence that began in December of 2020. And what has come out is truly shocking. And unfortunately, the inquiry only covers the one product that was in that tower. But many of the people involved who still work for the company oversee other products. And so we think that those concerns should extend to the entire brand of Kingspan in terms of their behavior related to K-15 fire safety testing. So thank you.
Thank you, Meredith. Is anyone else? I don't see anyone else with their hand raised. Okay, and there's no one on the phone. I think I would see them in the queue as well. So not seeing anyone else, I am going to close public comment. And we are going to move on to the school committee chair update / liaison reports. So for the chair's update, as I just previously mentioned, we are holding office hours. The school committee is holding office hours. The next set is March 23rd from 9 to 10:30 a.m. in the morning. This will be in the professional development room at the district administration office in the front of the high school. This is an open forum. You can stop in at 9, you can stop in at 9:30, you can stop in whenever you want. Charlie and I will be there along with Superintendent Parks, and I think Assistant Superintendent Borchers will be there as well. Is that right? Yep. So we just ask that you register ahead of time. We sent out a notice, I think maybe just prior to vacation. We will send that out again with the registration link. But feel free to come anytime during that. We really want to hear from the community. We've had 2 or maybe even 3 at this point. I can't remember, but they have been very successful. And I think we've learned a lot, and I think we've answered some questions. So I encourage people to attend those office hours. Absolutely. Second, I wanted to talk about our meetings going forward. As you know, we're on Zoom tonight. This is because we continue to have technology issues in the Little Theater. As anyone may recall from last month's meeting, people on Zoom couldn't hear us, and it was getting difficult. So Westwood Media Center and Steve Willett and our team here at the public schools are working feverishly to resolve those. But it looks like we need some equipment that has a longer lead time than it's expected. So for April and for May, we will be in person, but we will actually be in person at the public library because that has the equipment we need to be able to live stream. We also will be back to normal in terms of public participation. So we will not have a Zoom component for public participation. If you wish to, it'll be just like sort of pre-COVID. If you wish to publicly participate, we do ask that you be in person. So that will be April and May at the public library. And you will see that on the agenda. Second, I wanted to give a school building project update. So first, we have submitted the construction documents at 90% completion to our cost estimator to get a sense of where we are budget-wise. We expect to have those numbers back shortly, and we will be reviewing them at the next SBC meeting on April 1st. So we are all crossing our fingers. We are still on budget. We have been making sort of decisions, including creating a buffer in case we're not on budget and looking at things that we could potentially cut or remove or move into the alternate category or value engineer, but hopefully, we won't have too much of that to do. We will find out more in the next couple of weeks. Second, I wanted to raise an issue that's made its way into the community. Actually, Meredith, who spoke earlier at public participation, alluded to it. So in connection with products used in the project, the design team sometimes specifies a specific product as proprietary, which then excludes that product from the public bidding process. Well, so this is not the preferred method for procurement from our perspective, but it's sometimes necessary because no other product will meet that required specification. So for this project, as Meredith mentioned, the design team had initially designated an insulation, designated an insulation product made by Kingspan as proprietary. But after further design, they revised the insulation system for the building. And as a result of that redesign, the system is no longer needs a proprietary product. And at our last SBC meeting, the SBC voted to remove the Kingspan product from the specification. In the meantime, we had been contacted by the sheetrock union that Meredith represented. And as we understand it, it appears that there is a conflict between the union and Kingspan. And the union was reaching out to all public projects that may use the Kingspan projects, clearly including ours. So while we have pulled the product from the specification, I think the efforts of the union are continuing. I'm explaining all of this now because today, all of the parked cars at Hanlon and some houses that neighbor the Hanlon project received flyers advocating against the use of the Kingspan projects. So I do want to make two things clear. First, under Massachusetts law, the SBC cannot exclude any manufacturers from bidding on the project. We are required to go through a public bidding process, and we're therefore bound by that public bidding statute. So we cannot exclude manufacturers from the bidding process. Second, the SBC, the Westwood Permanent Building Committee, and our design and project management team will absolutely ensure that any and all products used in the Hanlon Deerfield project have met all federal, state, and municipal requirements, safety requirements, regulations, and standards. I need to make that clear. We will build a safe school. So while we're sort of caught in the middle of this dispute, I do want to let the community know and make sure that this community understands that we are aware of it. We're continuing to manage the project in accordance with Massachusetts applicable laws and also safety regulations. So that's where we are on the building project. I'm going to turn it over to Tony for an update on the school start time subcommittee.
Thank you, Maya. Committee met, I think a couple weeks ago, or maybe a week ago. Briefly, the next steps is we will be setting up a website in the next probably week or so, and we'll communicate to the community a website around there will be information with research, our reports, everything going on at the committee. So that'll be a next step. The other couple of next steps is as the superintendent referenced, planning a forum. Hopefully, we think the week of April 4th. We're just waiting to hear from the expert presenter to confirm, but hopefully the week of April 4th. And then after that, very shortly, like for the next day after we do that forum, to launch a survey, actually 3 surveys, one survey of parents, one survey of staff, and a survey of students as well, and gather that data. And then hopefully after the April break, gather that data and start to formulate some options and recommendations. So more to come. There's gonna be a lot of information, I think, coming in the next 30 days between forum, the website launch, as well as this survey. So more to come, but be on the lookout, and we are very interested in everyone's input.
Great, thanks, Tony. I'm really looking forward to that community forum. I think that'll be great. Any other questions for Tony?
Just to reiterate, because actually I was on a run. I was out running today. Someone stopped me on this question. Just to reiterate a few things, because I think when we will share this in the survey, the intent is to try to come up with at least a recommendation by June, and it may not be exact. It may be, general times of what school might be. It may not be the exact to the minute, but then just to the question I've been getting the most of is when would the changes happen? I think our intent, at least right now, is we would then do about a year of implementation. So any changes to the start time would not be until the start of this, the fall of 23. So
That's helpful. Okay, the policy review subcommittee. I think that's Carol or Charlie.
Amanda is on the committee now, and
Okay.
we do have a meeting scheduled. That's the good news.
Excellent.
We've been waiting a while, but we'll be getting going soon.
Great. And this, just to clarify, the reason we haven't scheduled one is because we were waiting for MASC to become available, because that's who is going to be assisting with the review. Is that right?
Right, we're anxious to get started on it, but they wanted to do all their review work. So they are advisors to us, and we're going to sit down and meet with them very
Okay.
soon.
Perfect. Great. Thank you, Charlie. Thanks, Amanda. Are there any other liaison reports?
I just wanted to give a quick report. So when Charlie asked about the equity audit, things are really loud at my house, so I didn't jump in. But I wanted to just let Charlie and the committee know that although I couldn't attend the in-person presentations, I did review the paper proposals from the different groups, and I found them to be really impressive. A number of the groups had experience working with other public districts here in Massachusetts. And the reports they provided, I thought were wonderful. And the data was great. They were able to break it. One of the groups at least was able to break it down by school, which I thought would be really neat in our district, because that's something we've talked about before, how there isn't necessarily consistency with DEI efforts. So I just wanted to provide that feedback, and just wanted to remind everybody about the Human Rights Task Force. I think, in light of what happened at the Thurston yesterday, I wanted to give that plug, and they're actually just starting off with some podcasts where members of the task force are getting together with Westwood Media Center and chatting about any pertinent issues or why they're part of the committee and the work that's being done. And it's on YouTube, Spotify, and I believe Apple Music as well. That's
Excellent. Creative use of podcasts. I like it. Okay, any other liaison updates? All right, moving into discussion items. First is the Student Opportunity Act Plan Amendment.
Yes, so you have a copy of our proposed SOA plan amendment in your packet. I just want to remind you, so this was a new requirement that came from the state 3 years ago, and it was tied to some legislation, the Student Opportunity Act, that really significantly increased funding to public schools. And remember, we talked at the time about the fact that certain districts experienced just like an incredible increase in funding. While we did get some additional funding in Westwood, it wasn't sort of like transformational level of in terms of that increase. And so basically, we submitted our first plan right before the shutdown. I think it was February 2020. And now we're at the point where it's time to do an update and an amendment to the plan. So what it's really focusing on is it's asking us to explain ways that we are applying this increase in funding for the purpose of narrowing some kind of gap, some kind of academic performance gap with one of our subgroups. And so you see that in our draft, the group that we've identified is students with disabilities, and we're specifically focusing in this plan at looking at Thurston. And in this plan, we've even narrowed it to math. So just to put it in context, and we've talked a lot about sort of our MCAS scores and other assessment data that we have. And there was a lot of good news there, right? So as you may recall, on the last MCAS, our grades 3 to 8 students in the aggregate were like 7th in the state in ELA and I think 15th in math. So things went well. However, we always look carefully and disaggregate the data and look for areas or pockets where we think we really need to, to work on things. And so middle school math was the area that we identified, and that's why we've chosen to make that the focus of the plan. So What's a little bit strange is that this plan, it's due in April, but it's talking about FY22 funding. So it's really describing work that's already in progress. And the other thing that's different about the amendment is they're asking us to comment not just on sort of an increase in chapter $70, but they've also said you can include what you're doing with ESSER funds as well. So we sort of rolled it all in to that plan. So I am happy to take any questions about it. We just wanted to give the school committee an opportunity to review it before we submit it.
I think this is a great idea, and thank you for honing in on that special area. A few years ago, I looked at the data, and the math was a problem, but I also found that in science, there was a big difference between special ed kids and the non-special eds, where the special ed kids did pretty well in a lot of other areas. And I was just wondering, has that issue disappeared, or will we look at it at some other time? Because it was of concern to me, because there's quite a big difference between the groups on the science issue.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I wouldn't say it's disappeared, but I know that Abby did take a look at it, and we were feeling relatively positive about science and that gap on science.
I would just say what we've seen is that particularly as the kids go into the high school, that the science gap shrinks significantly, and we have very good outcomes in terms of MCAS for the high school for science. And a lot of that has to do with some really innovative teaching. The math is a bigger focus for me at this time, and I really I'm hopeful that this plan goes forward in this way, because in the middle school, the math placement really does start to impact kind of your trajectory through math all the way through. And I think that that's important when we think about college and career, particularly access to STEM careers. So I really thought about math, particularly for kind of the long haul. And I think that's the way to get the most bang for the bucks kind of all of this particular money that they're asking us to account for. So that's the reasoning.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? We will be voting on this under action items, just a reminder. Okay. Moving on to the bullying prevention update.
Great. Thank you. So we're excited to talk about some of the work that's happening across the district. And so I have a fantastic team here that's going to give a presentation for you tonight. So Abby Hanscom is going to lead us off, and then we have Matt Kuklintz sort of representing the elementary group, and Mike from the middle school, Amy Davenport from the high school, and then our closer tonight is Donna Tobin, who is contemplating her transition to SEL coordinator. So we're putting her to work a little bit early in talking about some of these things tonight. So I guess my job is to run the slide deck. And so I will turn it over to Abby.
Great, thank you. So you can go to our first slide, Emily. So the overview for this presentation tonight is a quick review of the history of how we in Massachusetts got to the law, the legal framework that we have, and a quick sense of the technical pieces of that. But really what we're more focused on tonight is the particular curriculum, the programming that is in place at each of the levels in the school system. So that's where we want to spend the most of our time. We want to talk about what are some new challenges, as well as some kind of, not so new particular challenges that we continue to work on, and then really kind of give you a sense of what's next and what we're looking at for the future. So a big message for this evening's presentation is that it's all connected, right? So anything we're talking about tonight, you can see kind of reverberate throughout the school system at different levels, kind of like the masking presentations that you saw earlier tonight, that there are themes and thematic ideas that go through elementary, really preschool, elementary, middle, and high school. And so what we want to do is say there is very clearly in the Massachusetts law around bullying that came in 2010 and then was amended again in 2014, a very prescripted technical response that is how we do things when there has been an allegation of bullying. And that includes many of the things that you might be familiar with around specific letters we send people, a process and procedure for an investigation, and then how we document the findings. And so those pieces are articulated in the bullying prevention plan that we just renewed at school committee recently, as well as in the school committee policy, in the policy manual. Those things are really also reflected largely in our school district mission and values and our strategic plan. So if you remember, there's a whole theme in the strategic plan around healthy and supported school community. And that's really where this topic lives when we think about kind of the big strategic plan for the district. And so you have a live link there in your slides to that strategic planning document if you want to take a look at it in the future. A major method of delivery of bullying prevention content and materials to students comes through curricular resources. And we're going to share some of those with you tonight and some pictures so you can get a sense of those things. And I wanted to bifurcate those things for you tonight into formal curriculum as well as informal. And the formal stuff are things that are published by companies and come in boxes and have binders and all the stuff that I love from like my kind of organizational mind, you know, that you can put your physical hands on and see. However, what's almost more important than that piece is the informal curriculum, because that's really the living, breathing application of those more formal curriculum documents and lessons. And that's when we start to get into things that are harder to talk about, right? Because it's school climate, it's how we build culture. And those are things I think that Emily was talking about earlier this evening in her comments. And those are the long-term projects that we're working on as well. So our large scale goal as a district is that if you can invest in prevention, it means you have fewer incidents where you have to be reactive and responding to. And so that's kind of our big picture. Oh, Emily, I think if you go back the other direction, there was one more. Oh,
I think we're on the right slide.
There you go. Go for it, Matt.
All right, thank you, Abby. So when I think about bullying and when I think about what we do in terms of bullying and bullying actions and behaviors, the way that we look at it and think about it is as SEL, social emotional learning, and their skill breakdowns. What you see in front of you is the CASEL framework. The CASEL framework is something that undergirds that explicit SEL or social emotional learning, that skill teaching that teachers do on a daily basis. In a couple of minutes, Dr. Tobin is going to more fully explain those 5 competencies that you see around there in the middle that make up this framework. What I want to do at this moment is just draw your attention to those blue concentric circles that envelop it. As you can see, as Abby just talked about, the social emotional competencies or life skills that we explicitly teach, they impact our classrooms, and those classrooms will impact how those skills will impact how students feel in our classrooms. And as those classrooms contribute to a school, this is how our culture is built. And as you can see, there's the interplay here between our schools and our communities and families. And so as you can see, these are fundamental to what we do. If you could move us forward, that'd be great. As Abby had mentioned, there are certain curriculums that we utilize on a daily basis and throughout our school year. When we're speaking or thinking about our elementary school, we have most mornings, if not every morning, starting with morning meetings. And within our morning meeting, we have different subsets of curriculums or approaches that we utilize. You can see in the bottom there, we have that blue box that says responsive classroom. That's kind of an overall holistic approach. And then we also have different critical lessons that have been pulled from something called Open Circle that we utilize in terms of looking at and explicitly teaching anti-bullying behaviors. This year, we've also taken a look at, through our professional development and our work with teachers, how to embed these social emotional learning, these explicit teaching these explicit competencies. How do we embed them across the curriculum? So it's not just a morning meeting, it's not just maybe a closing at the end of the day. It's not just an SEL block within a day. It's how do we embed that across our readers and writers workshops? How do we embed that within our social studies and our science and also math? It's something that we think about throughout the day. Additionally, we utilize something that we call the same and different, like me curriculum. This is designed to increase students' understanding and acceptance of differences amongst peers and how we can promote an inclusive environment both in our school and in our classroom, but also in the world in general. So that's some of the curriculums that we use on a daily basis and throughout our school years at the elementary level. We also have different programs that we utilize, and one of the ones that I wanted to highlight today was the Body Safety Theater. The Body Safety Theater is put on by, it's a partnership between us and the Westwood Youth and Family Services. They recruit high school students and train them up in how to act as actors within thinking about our third grade classrooms. These students come in, they'll perform skits, and it's about how to keep our bodies safe and to think about how to respond when people are doing things that we're not comfortable with. And then finally, we start at a young age in terms of thinking about digital citizenship. And that the bottom part right there where we say clear and the acceptable use policy, we have the clear word meted out there on the right-hand side where we're thinking about it in terms of being considerate, using technology in a legal way, being ethical, appropriate, and responsible. It's something that we work with kiddos at a very young age so that we can start to think about what does it look like to be a responsible user of technology as we move up into the middle and high school levels. That is what we are doing these days at the elementary. Mike?
Yeah, so hi everyone. I think a lot of what I'm going to talk about is really just an extension, and I think we've worked really hard at the middle school over the past few years to try to think about how to bridge what was going on in the elementary school to the middle school. And so very similar to what Matt talked about in terms of open circle and morning meeting, we just call it something different because of the developmental level of our students. So we refer to it as advisory. And if you will recall, advisory was inconsistently meeting under the old schedule, and in the new schedule, it has a really dedicated time of our schedule. We dedicate 20 minutes daily now, which when you think about it over the course of the year is approximately 3,600 minutes to specific targeted SEL work. And so many of the things that Matt talked about in terms of the CASTLE framework and the pieces of that come out in our advisory teaching. So we use several resources from programs, developmental design being one of them, responsive classroom being the other. They have specific lessons that we follow. Our advisories are conducted in a circle because that's a very powerful way for all of us to see, look at one another and have conversations. And then we follow a pattern of having a greeting activity, a share of some kind. We do some announcements in there, and then we related to teams specifically. And then we have an activity where really students practice those social emotional skills through that facilitated activity. And so one of the pictures I have there specific is a slide from an activity we did in October related to, what is bullying, what's mean behavior, what's rude behavior, and what's just drama. And students got into groups and had discussions using some situations. So role playing and things like that happen there. And so that's really where I think our curriculum piece is the strongest. And then we have several other aspects that are really like programs or other kinds of pieces that we've put in. So we have the Bullying Prevention Theater, which we partner with Westwood Youth and Families. I think that's similar to what Matt talked about happening in third grade. Westwood High School students perform skits for the sixth graders, and then there's follow-up discussion that occurs. This year, we did that more in a remote virtual way. So students watched videos of the skit and had conversations in their advisory groups. In the past, we've done that more in a live setting and then broken up into our advisory groups. We also have the Anti-Defamation League, and our peer leaders get trained from their trainers, and then they bring programs to our sixth graders, which cover topics, anti-racist topics, and all varying kinds of things about getting to know who you are and how to respect the differences within others and your identity. And so that those students started about a month or so ago, 2 months ago, and they've been doing some really nice work in those advisories with our sixth grade students. I put recess on here because that was not a part of the sort of the Thurston day in terms of a consistent piece. And now we really look to get kids outside for at least 10 minutes in every one of our lunch blocks as part of the lunchtime. And I think that's just a really important time for our students to sort of practice those SEL skills that they're learning in all other aspects of the day. And I think it's an important part of our schedule. The field has been covered with snow and ice for a bit of time now, so we've had to improvise. But when we're out there, kids are playing games, they're interacting, adults are moving around, and I think that's just a natural embedded way for us to reinforce those skills and make sure students are treating each other respectfully. And then we also have the acceptable use trainings that happen at the beginning of the year, which also covered the topics of cyberbullying. So that's sort of a few things that are going on at the middle school. I think I'm turning it over to Amy.
Thanks, Mike. I'm feeling pretty confident that my children are going to start screaming at any moment because it's my turn to speak. So I'm going to apologize in advance. What you'll hear from the high school is, again, an extension of the work that's happening K-8. One difference I think you'll notice is that as our students get older, we really progress away from the binders and the prepackaged instruction that Abby loves so dearly. And we move much more towards an informal instruction. And a lot of that work is actually driven by students because of the foundational skills that they develop in the middle school around, developing their identities and learning more about one another. We do have some explicit curriculum that happens in the 9th and 10th grade. It's really important for us to help students acclimate to our new school culture at the high school. And the two ways that we really emphasize how we treat one another are in our 9th grade guidance seminars and in our 9th and 10th grade wellness classes. Similar to what you heard about the emphasis on our clear guidelines for digital citizenship at the elementary and middle schools, we actually have a series of workshops as part of our freshman guidance seminar that are designed by our instructional technology coaches that really focus on digital citizenship, on cyberbullying, and especially because our students are applying for jobs and applying for college and entering the world beyond high school, we focus a lot on digital footprints. And so all of that work is really centered around the impact that digital behavior can have on our futures as well as our present day situations. We spend a lot of explicit time working with students on those issues. In wellness classes, we spend a lot of time talking about standing up for what we believe in and not being bystanders. And that's a real explicit component of our anti-bullying curriculum in the wellness courses. Part of why we spend a lot of time talking about bullying at the high school is because of the impact it can have on student mental health. And so one other component of our anti-bullying work actually centers around suicide prevention and awareness. We do 2 screenings and trainings for students in the 9th and in the 12th grades that really focus on empowering students to look out for one another and to ask for help if they need it or if they can see that a friend needs it. There's a real emphasis too in this prevention program on developing strong relationships with trusted adults and helping students identify who those look like in and outside of school. Beyond the explicit instruction, there's also a lot of informal instruction that happens, particularly across the humanities in high school. That work centers around exposing students to diverse perspectives, really helps them to build empathy and to prepare them for the world beyond Westwood High School. When we think about how students can treat one another better, we want them to think about the impact of their actions, and exposing them to different viewpoints and broadening their perspectives really helps them to do that. We do have a lot of really exciting programs that kind of also fall into the informal category. And a lot of that programming comes from students clubs and interests, and from the feedback they give us about the kinds of things they want to talk about with their peers. Some of that programming happens in smaller groups during S block. It also happens broadly during class meetings, as well as during whole school programs. We also have some programming that is centered around building strong relationships for students right when they get to the high school. So less formal curriculum and more about finding older students in the building who can help them navigate this new environment and be a friendly face to smile at them in the hall. So those are our Westwood ambassadors, and they actually start working with rising ninth graders in the spring before students enter the high school. This year, we're really excited to expand that program and develop a more robust freshman orientation experience for a rising ninth grade class. So we'll be excited to talk about that more in the coming months with our current 8th grade families. We also have some mental health and wellness programs that happen both during S block and during, quarterly. We call it our Westwood High School Stress Less program. Once every quarter, we have therapy dogs come in, like a whole fleet of them, and they fill our auditorium lobby with students. We also have some wellness activities that are centered there too. We do rock painting, gratitude walls. Our yoga club facilitates yoga sessions during S block. So it's kind of like a joint effort between faculty and students to promote wellness and well-being. And then we've also really brought in some diverse perspectives that come from student groups, like our Let's Talk About Race, Culture, and Ethnicity group. They've piloted a program this year called Westwood High School Together that is really focused on varying viewpoints throughout the year and is helping us bring a speaker next week. Her name's Dr. Kim. And the training that Emily alluded to earlier for our staff was some work that we're doing to support that program and help students talk about difficult things next week and beyond. And I think we're ready for the next slide.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the developmental work and how this all comes together. So the programs and curriculums that Matt, Mike, and Amy were just discussing are put into place to ensure that students have opportunities to develop social emotional skills and competencies throughout their educational experience. While social emotional learning curriculums and competencies and some of the language might be relatively new, the skills, they encompass skills that have been critical to students' developmental success for years. You heard us talk a lot about CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, and that was founded in 1994. It's changed and adapted over time with some of the skills and competencies, but the core values are the same. So they start with really understanding yourself, and in those two competencies focus on self-awareness and self-management, which really is recognizing your values and what is important to you, knowing your triggers and what actions or activities might cause big responses or emotions, and then how do you manage those emotions and behaviors to achieve your goals. It's about how you feel and controlling your impulses and knowing who you are and how you manage feelings and emotions and deal with things like stress and anxiety. The next competency area is really around social awareness, and this is learning about and being aware of your impact on others. So interacting with others, making connections, developmental skills, showing empathy and understanding and recognizing how others feel and think. It's about respecting others and appreciating diversity and perspective taking. We have to appreciate others for who they are. And those are foundational skills that really help students and adults understand relationships and build relationships. So relationship building really focuses on student learning and how to develop relationships with peers, with other people who might be different than them, how to work in groups, how to deal with conflict. And in elementary school, relationships are often based on who lives close to you, who's in your class. It revolves around family, friends, and friends of your parents and play dates that your parents organize. But as students enter upper elementary school, and certainly by middle school, they're starting to make decisions about their own friendships. Communication skills are more fully developing, and who they are and who they want to engage with socially moves more towards common interests, things like sports and clubs, things like that. This is a time when friendships change and sometimes friendships end, which can really be difficult. Relationships take work, conflicts happen, developing strategies to move past conflicts and resolve issues and to restore relationships all take skill. Middle school might be the first time students are truly moving away from relationships that aren't working. And this can be really hard even for adults. Ending friendships that aren't working can lead to hurt feelings and conflict. And how to end those relationships and make good decisions about your friendship groups, about the type of people you want to be with, and the type of person you want to become really starts to impact relationships. And then really the final thing that the competencies address is responsible decision-making. Students learn how to be able to make decisions. They need to make constructive choices about their own personal and social behaviors. They need to make ethical decisions that reflect their own values and the values of their family and community. Evaluating friendships and making decisions about who to align with and how to make decisions when problems occur start to take shape. As the brain develops, we know that sometimes responsible decision-making doesn't happen. Identifying problems, analyzing situations, and then problem solving is a developmental process that is developing throughout childhood and right into, it can happen all through being a teenager and even into your early 20s. The SEL competencies and skills need to be taught, practiced, and formed through interactions and skill building, both at school and home. And that's why we hope both these formal and informal lessons support our student development in these areas. Some things that have impacted the developmental work, certainly the pandemic has impacted students' experiences in social situations. There's been limited time for students to have play dates and birthday parties, and all of those types of group experiences have really been limited. Social interactions, even with extended family, have been interrupted. And how they interact with classmates, even project work and group work, peer interactions, all between physical distancing and social distancing, things like that have impacted just their experiences and their exposure. The pandemic has caused some long-term stress and fatigue. The pandemic has led to fatigue and stress both for students and adults. It's extremely hard to remain resolved and resilient for extended periods of time. And we see the impact of the pandemic in so many ways on the lives of our students. They feel the stress and fatigue. And it impacts not only our students, but our parents. Parent anxiety is really high. Parents are anxious about the impact, rightfully so, on their children. They're worried about their children's mental health and well-being and want their children to have typical or normal school and home experiences. People are worried about their kids, and this worry can lead to less tolerance for conflict and problem solving. And preventative work and skill building helps us to remain in a learning mode and not a reactive mode. And finally, I know that Mike and other people have talked a little bit about social media, but that does impact how children develop socially. It's a more dominant mode of interaction. As physical distancing and isolation increased, many children were interacting on social media in multiple ways. These interactions can really help us be connected in lots of ways. We can stay connected with friends, we can stay connected to relatives when they're not with us, but it can also cause problems. It's very public. Communications are shared by multiple people. Things are permanent and they're not easily retractable once they're in writing and they're out there in the social media realm. If you say something to somebody in person in a moment of anger or just frustration, you can deal with that and move on from it. But when it's in writing and everyone gets to weigh in and have an opinion or a comment, it can really cause some significant problems. So we try to do a lot of work on acceptable use and how to use social media. The anonymous part of social media can be extremely hurtful. People don't have to own what they say. And social media is not a good tool for navigating conflict. Most of us find it difficult to have difficult conversations, and social media is not a good tool for navigating these difficult conversations. It's easy to say things in writing you wouldn't say to somebody in person. People that are receiving the messages don't often understand the tone or the feelings behind the responses, and those feelings and those words can live on. Social media is also an issue for adults. The culture of conflict that currently exists and the culture of saying whatever you want without thinking about the consequences of the impact of what you're saying might have is astonishing to me, that adults continue to engage in this kind of stuff on social media. And we need to work as a school and as a community to counteract that culture and to help students form caring, respectful relationships in a caring environment. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So what does that mean for the work ahead? I think, the importance of social emotional learning is obvious. I think that we will continue to do specific targeted instruction and lessons in the 5 competencies. This includes embedding social emotional skills and language into our content lessons and developing and fostering safe and brave places for learning. It certainly connects to all the DEI work that we're doing. We know that data from traditionally marginalized populations, students of color, students with disabilities, can be more at risk in terms of bullying, feelings of isolation, and not belonging in the school community. Our goal is that the equity audit, along with Latifah's new role as the Director of Equity, Integration, and Community Partnership, will help ensure that our school and our wider community is a safe and brave place for all students. We continue to do professional development, some of which has been mentioned already. Teachers were previously trained in Open Circle, and now we're training all teachers in Responsive Classroom. Our school psychologists and adjustment counselors partner with classroom teachers to do lessons on things like feeling skills and zones of regulation, same and different like me curriculum. We recently had a full day PD with Jeff Benson on improving everyday lessons with SEL. So how do we embed SEL skills in our lessons, in our language when we're doing content, academic content lessons? There were some follow-up sessions with teachers and also some targeted work with evaluators. So when we're in classrooms and we're looking at teaching and learning, we can be thinking about how SEL is embedded into those lessons. We have additional adjustment counselors budgeted for next year, which I think will be helpful. And then really thinking about partnering support for parents. So guidance counselors and school adjustment counselors work with parents relating to specific students and specific needs. But we're also offering district workshops through things like CPAC and the PTOs. And as Emily mentioned earlier, Elizabeth Englander, the director of the Mass Aggression Reduction Center at Bridgewater State, will be doing a presentation on student social relationships and social media. So those are steps that we're taking as we move forward. So there's lots going on in the district around to prevent bullying, but really on also developing kids' social emotional competencies and skills to have strong, healthy relationships and to make responsible decisions. Well, that's really it. I don't know if anybody has any questions for me or for others.
I have a couple questions. So for Matt, Matt, you mentioned the same but different program, and I'm interested in how it talks about differences between kids. And I'm interested in sort of learning what types of differences. I think that when my oldest was there many years ago, it focused a lot on physical disabilities, but maybe not so much on other differences. And I'm curious as to now how that curriculum has evolved.
Yeah, I know that, Abby, you can weigh in a little bit around the how that's developed over the years, but I can say that it goes from a very developmental progression of, like you said, Maya, around the physical disabilities, which are easier to understand as kiddos are younger, up to and including in the 5th grade realm. We fourth and 5th grade band, we'll tackle some topics around autism. We'll tackle topics around mental health, different things that you are not always so pervasive, or that's the wrong word, not pervasive, but so physically identifiable, to normalize and to understand what that is and how to be inclusive and to be a good friend.
Yeah, I would just add the curriculum, was written and built in-house in Westwood with a lot of input from teachers and grade level teachers in particular. And it's actually stacked from kind of the most concrete to the most abstract. So if you think about kindergarten, we really think about friendship and connectedness. And then first grade is a focus really on physical disabilities. And then it moves to the sensory disabilities, vision and hearing impairments. And then by third grade, we're talking about intellectual disabilities, cognitive disabilities. And by fourth grade, we're talking about specific learning disabilities, talking about attentional disabilities. And then in fifth grade, we're talking more and more about kind of bigger, more abstract ideas around the autism spectrum, as well as mental health. And it's built purposefully to build on each other. And it's one of those things that I always hope we have more time and more energy to give to it, because it has a great capacity to build empathy, which is a theme, I think, across tonight's presentation.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think, I know that, I don't know if it's the 6th grade class or the 7th grade class, but one of them didn't get the same but different learning because of COVID. I think that was spring of 2020. And I'm wondering if there's efforts, and maybe this is a question for Mike, to sort of try and recreate that for that specific class, to make up for that loss.
I think what I would say is I would, and I think Chrissy Womble in our health classes in 6th grade definitely does some work similar to what you've heard Abby and Matt talk about tonight. And 6th graders have 90 days of health, and then they switch to culinary arts and consumer education. So I think that they would repeat and spiral some of those things in Chrissy's environment for sure. So I'm pretty confident that they're getting some aspect of what they missed.
Okay. And sort of following up, Mike, with you on the advisory block. I know that before you worked really hard on this restructure of the schedule, including the advisory block. And before, it seemed to be sort of disparate among the advisory blocks in terms of both curriculum and format and the purpose even. And I'm just curious, now that we're 8, 7, I don't even know how many months into the new schedule, whether you're seeing sort of consistency between advisory. Is there a real curriculum that each advisory teacher is implementing, and is it consistent among the grades?
Yeah, so we have advisory coordinators designated for each grade level. So we have 1 or 2 staff members who play that role. And what they do is they create the curriculum, the slides that all advisors use during that time. So we decided there's many different books on like prepared sort of lesson plans for advisories, and developmental design has 2 or 3 or 4 now, and responsive classroom has 1. So in an effort to sort of not repeat as much content, although I would say like all books are set up the same, it's like goal setting and then relationship building and then other kinds of thematic units, they pull right from there. So we decided to make each grade level have 1 particular resource. So that way that's like the 6th grade book, and this is the 7th grade book and the 8th grade book. And so walking around, I noticed early on in the year that I think people were doing some things differently with setup. And we talked about that. And we talked about the power of being in a circle and the importance of being in a circle for advisory. And the staff, we had good conversations and teams about that. And I could speak pretty confidently that when I walk around during advisory, I see all students sitting in a circle, and I can go from one room to another, and the slides are looking much the same. And it's like, I'm in the same room the whole time. So that feels good. It's just by grade level, not whole school. So
Right, clearly. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
I had some, oh, I'm sorry, Maya, were you all done with your questions?
I have one for Amy, but you can go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. And then Amy, the Westwood Ambassador Program, can you just talk a little bit more about that? Is that like a one-to-one thing or?
So right now it's not, but that is actually our vision for the program that we're hoping to launch this summer. We're really hoping to do more of like a buddy system. And so you would have somebody that you are paired with early on in the summer. Right now, the two things that the Westwood Ambassadors do for all ninth grade students are they facilitate some small group discussions during there's like a field trip to the high school in June. And so it's an opportunity for students to talk to current students and ask questions about what to expect. They offer up, really practical advice about how, the boys and girls bathrooms are labeled differently in different hallways, like heads up on that before you have to go. But they also ask really good questions about, acclimating and transitioning. They always have questions about lunch. So that's kind of the first foray into that work. And then they also facilitate tours around the building, both during the summer and that day. We are hoping to do something more robust and actually partner with our National Honor Society students as well, because there's a lot of them. And we think that would be a really nice way to connect students early on with upperclassmen.
Okay, great. Thanks. Go ahead, Amanda. I'm done.
Thank you. So my question is surrounding like how families are pulled in, specifically, when Matt started with describing, I think it was the Kessel framework, there was, the sphere for families. And I think it's pretty self-explanatory at the elementary level. I mean, my understanding is it's like a call or an email from the teacher. But as the kids get older, if there are themes like at the Thurston, how is that communicated out, or at the high school, Amy, if there are like concerns regarding some like significant mental health issues or suicidal ideology or anything like that, what kind of support is offered, and how do the parents fit in?
Are you going to the rock, paper, scissors?
You can go first.
Okay. So I think, I think when things come up, I've put things in newsletters, I've put things in sort of my weekly updates from time to time. I know team leaders are sending out communications, especially in sixth grade, relatively frequently, giving updates in general about some things. I definitely think it's an area that we can improve on for sure. I think it's, this is really the first year that we're going through this true curriculum kind of process with this dedicated time for advisory. So I think we could definitely do a little bit more with that. I also think that, students talking with parents about what they did in advisory today is just an organic way to come about that. And I think we've really done a lot to talk about how we've dedicated that specific amount of time to our day. And it's every day, starting every day off like that. So I think those are some of the ways that it's happening at the middle school.
At the high school, I think we are still trying to figure out where the opportunities are to call parents in. I think some pre-pandemic thinking really centered on focusing on communicating with students and empowering them to be young adults. I think that changed when half of their learning was happening in their parents' living rooms. And we're still trying to figure out like what is the appropriate amount of communication, what is too much communication. And we do the same things in terms of newsletter communications. When we're dealing with more of a specific student-centered crisis, we always loop in the family proactively, even if it maybe is absolutely nothing. Maybe something comes up in a student's piece of writing that we just want a parent to know as a parent. So we definitely err, I would say, on the side of over communication when we're dealing with individual student issues. Similarly, if we're processing a potential bullying situation, there is a ton of communication. Some of that is pretty highly regulated, which Abby alluded to earlier. But we try to just be really proactive and transparent when we're talking about specific student situations. And if we do have a bigger school-wide situation we're responding to and working through with students, we always alert families and try to share relevant resources that are specifically geared towards parents and guardians so that they can kind of extend the conversation at home.
Thank you. And then in terms of like the mental health support, how far does like how far do you all go in helping students access services outside of school? There's obviously only so much that can be done during the school day, and some kids may not even be able to show up for school. So how do you help families that way?
Sure. And Abby, I feel like you were maybe going to start speaking first. Do you want to take the first one?
I was just going to say, it's important to remember that we've tried to build a multi-layered cake of clinical supports over a long time. So there's a variety of people that might interface with a student or with a family member, depending on who has a good relationship, what the context is, all of those things. I'm assuming, Amy, you were going to say something similar. And this other idea that, our goal is always to connect kids and parents to resources that they can use for the long haul, right, outside of school, and build a network of support, but also understand that sometimes school is the kids' world, right? It's like their workplace, it's their daily place, and that we do, for many kids, provide quite a lot of support, more than many people I think people would be surprised. So it's a balancing act. We have interface, I just signed the invoice again to do another 2 years. We've partnered now for probably 6 or 8 years with Westwood Youth and shared those costs to maintain that subscription. And that's an intentional thing to build a bridge between the school and the larger resource and referral network out there.
I'll only add, Abby, that a lot of the professional development work that we've done has also centered on how we can provide better in-school supports. That's let us meet a lot of really well-connected people. It's been very, very challenging for families to find providers who are currently taking new adolescent patients. And so when we met with Dr. Kim to talk about her school-wide assembly last week, she said, actually, she knows some people who she thinks would take on a couple of specific students. And so we've been doing trainings with McLean's Hospital with our guidance and student services departments. And that actually helps us to build further relationships and connect parents to additional resources.
That was my next question, Amy. So that's really helpful. Thank you for that. That's so reassuring to know that you're able to maybe like expedite services for some kids that are in crisis. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I just wanted to follow up on the parent, just a suggestion. So I think one of the hardest things for parents is, clearly, particularly with the older kids, is getting your kids to talk to you. And so I thought Mike had a really good point when he said, ask your student what they did in advisory. And I think in a newsletter, if you can sort of drop those in, right, to get like parent tip, your student is in a 9th grade seminar and it's talking about, social media. Ask your child about it, just something where you don't say, how was your day? And they say, fine. And that's the end of the conversation. With like my little one, I'm like, what'd you do in gym? What'd you eat at lunch? Those kind of questions for the older kids, I think would be really helpful, particularly because they're not nearly as forthcoming as elementary school kids. It's just something to think about, just giving parents that piece of information that they won't otherwise have to trigger that conversation.
That's a great suggestion.
Yeah, and I just wanted to kind of close up our presentation by saying we hope it's been helpful to like kind of peek behind the curtain and see how we do the work all the time. It's really an ongoing part of school that a lot of people, maybe it didn't exist when we all went to school, or you just don't necessarily see it all day because you're not in the building all day. And so our goal tonight was to just give you a snapshot, and this by no means was like comprehensive. There's even probably many more things we could have come up with, but just we want to be mindful of people's time and energy tonight, and we just wanted to say, I hope it's helpful to see kind of what it looks like in real life. So thanks for asking for this information. We really appreciate being able to share it with you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Actually, I just have one final question. And I don't know if this is Abby or Guru in assessments, Allison question, but how do you think about assessment in kind of the SEL world? I mean, because that's, look, we know it's been obviously it's been a tough time for a lot of people, but how do we think about assessment and how we're doing against, on these metrics?
I'm going to take that one. I've been very quiet tonight. So
you're the guru on assessment.
I don't know about that. I think I have work to do there. I mean, I think there are kind of two forms of assessment for something like this. Tony, there's things that are sort of baked into what we do. So looking at data that actually exists, like referrals to the office, data behavior, those kinds of behavioral data, attendance data, things that we can just sort of look at and track over time. So for example, as you're aware, at the middle school, we've seen this sort of uptick in some of those behavioral data. That's part of what we're looking to respond to effectively right now. And I think that data actually is incredibly informative, but sometimes you have to go beyond that. So we have other sources to, as you remember, we did the panorama last year. We were looking to kind of roll that out on an annual basis. We haven't done it this year, but we are going to kind of gather an additional round of that data and start to track over time. Do we see differences year to year in that kind of, and that's a student self-assessment of skills. So it's an interesting form of data. Similarly, for some grade levels on the MCAS, there's what's called the vocal, which is sort of climate data. Students talking a little bit about the school environment, safety in the school environment. That is incredibly valuable to us. I don't know if you remember our student rep from a couple years ago, Chris Bezdadona, talked about that. And so we do have some really good sources out there. Honestly, we think the equity audit will also give us some good information, both the student surveys and the focus groups. So does that give you a little bit of a sense of, no problem.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
I just want to say this was really great. I found it super valuable. So thank you all for taking the time to put it together and to be with us tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this has been at the forefront of our minds as a school committee, particularly the past year and a half. We've seen the impact on our own students, on our own kids, on students, certainly on the faculty and staff. So we are very grateful for the work we're doing here, that you guys are doing. And this was very helpful in putting it all, the framework in and really understanding it. So many, many thanks for that. And keep up the good work. Okay, moving on to action items. So we have a vote to submit the Student Opportunity Act Plan Amendment to DESE, to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. This is a vote we need to take. So can I get a motion for that?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? We had the discussion. Okay, Charlie,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Amanda,
Yes.
Tony,
Yes.
and I'm a yes. Motion is carried. Okay, we are moving to a vote to authorize submission of the statement of interest for Sheehan School to the Massachusetts School Building Authority. There is actually a resolution that we have to read. Tony, would you mind reading the resolution?
Yes, I will. All right, it might take a minute. All right, resolved, having convened an open meeting on March 10th, 2022, prior to the statement of interest submission closing date, the School Committee of Western Massachusetts, in accordance with its charter, bylaws, and ordinances, has voted to authorize the superintendent to submit to the Massachusetts School Building Authority a statement of interest dated April 29th, 2022, Sheehan Elementary School, located at 549 Pond Street, Westwood, which describes and explains the following deficiencies and priority categories which an application may be submitted to the Massachusetts School Building Authority in the future. Priority 5, replacement, renovation, or modernization of school facility systems, such as roofs, windows, boilers, heating and ventilation systems, to increase energy conservation and decrease energy-related costs in a school facility. And priority 7, replacement or addition of obsolete buildings in order to provide a full range of programs consistent with state and approved requirements, and hereby further specifically acknowledges by submitting this statement of interest form, the Massachusetts School Building Authority in no way guarantees acceptance or the approval of an application, awarding of a grant, or any other funding commitment from the Massachusetts School Building Authority, or commits the school district to filing an application for funding with the Massachusetts School Building Authority.
Thank you. So I think that constitutes the motion. Is there any discussion?
I guess like I think I mentioned last time, it's not so much discussion on the motion. It's just, we should just think about as a committee at some point, either later in the spring or at some point having a broader conversation about the Sheehan, what are the options? Obviously, you know, MSBA or no MSBA and what our timing is. So that's really my comment, not so much against the motion. It's just around that.
Yes. I think we should look at putting that discussion on the agenda, maybe for April or May.
Yeah.
Okay, I will do a roll call.
And
Charlie,
have a second. I just want to make
Oh,
sure we do this
do
all
we have a second?
perfectly.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Emily. Now the roll call. Charlie,
Yes.
Amanda,
Yes.
Tony,
Yes.
and Carol.
Yes.
Okay, great. Now we're at a vote to approve the meeting minutes of February
And I'm
10th.
sorry to be a pest. Did you vote?
No, I forgot. Yes, I vote yes. The
Okay, great. Thanks.
motion is carried. It's getting late, Emily. It's getting late. Okay, vote to approve the meeting minutes of February 10th, 2022. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on the minutes? Okay, Charlie,
Yes.
Tony,
Yes.
Amanda,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
and I am a yes. Motion is carried. And finally, a vote to accept the school start time subcommittee meeting minutes of January 26, 2022. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Okay, discussion on those minutes? Okay, Tony,
Yes.
Charlie,
Yes.
Amanda,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
and I am a yes. Is there any new, oh, motion's carried. Is there any new business not reasonably anticipated? Nope, okay. So we are now going to move to executive session. I believe I need a motion to do that. And the motion, I think, is in our agenda. So can I have somebody read the motion with the language in the agenda? I can read it. Okay, can I get a motion to conduct strategy sessions with respect to collective bargaining and pending litigation, which would have a detrimental effect on the position of the school committee if discussions were held in open session?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All right, Carol,
Excuse me, Mayor.
yes. Do I need to say we won't return to open session?
Yes, and it's also for collective bargaining with the Teachers Association needs to be part of the motion.
I think I said with respect to collective bargaining.
But it needs to say with the Westwood Teachers Association.
With the Westwood Teachers Association. Do I need to read it again?
Would you like me to read it?
Sure.
Move to go into executive session to conduct strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Westwood Teachers Association and pending litigation, which would have a detrimental effect on the position of the school committee if discussion was held in open session. The committee will not return to open session.
Thank you. Can I get a motion for that motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second, okay. Okay, Charlie,
Yes.
Tony,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
and Amanda.
Yes.
And I am a yes. Motion is carried. I repeat, again, the committee will not return to open session. All right. And so we are adjourned to executive session. Thank you, everybody. We appreciate you guys being here tonight and for the great presentations, and I hope everyone has a great weekend.